Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Success in Black and White.
The podcast. We are back one more again. We are back one more again
Yes, coming to you live.
from the house.
I remember this time.
You remember. and we are not alone.
We are not alone. We're excited to have a special guest with us. I'm particularly excited because if you guys have been rocking with us for a while, you know we've done an episode before on ghost mentors. And this is one of my ghost mentors, like the person who has no idea that they are part of your life, but they are. So I'm excited to introduce you guys to Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold. She is the creator of Gold Enterprises, LLC. She's also an educator, and she happens to be the assistant provost of diversity and inclusion at a large public institution. She is also, you guys already heard her bio, but I just want to bring this up because on top of everything else that she does, which I'm sure we're going to hear about, she's also an ordained minister, which I never knew. And we had a interesting conversation about that because he has some direct ties to that as well. So we are so excited that you're here, and thank you for being with us. We think that our audience is going to get a lot from this interview tonight.
Oh, we have much to talk about, Thank you for having me. And I think the problem will be we might need to have like multiple episodes of this conversation because it's so much. We have so much overlap going on. But I'm very happy to be here with both of you.
We're so excited. Well, we want to jump in because I don't want to waste any time. And I feel like the questions that we have for you in the middle and that could potentially pop up might take a lot of our time. So we want to know, you tell us about you. Tell us a little bit about, I feel like this is an interview question. Like, tell us about your personal life and your career. Like, basically, though, we want to know, how did you get from point A to point B? Because you are doing so many things. So give us kind of the overview of Shaunna.
Yeah, well, there's so much. I'll start personally and then kind of move out from there. But I was born and raised in Southern Virginia, right outside of Lynchburg, Virginia, in this small town called Alta Vista. My parents still live there. My grandparents still live there. And so how I kind of moved north over time, I went to undergrad at James Madison University out in the Shenandoah Valley. It's beautiful out there. It's also freezing cold at night, no matter what time of year it is. So you're down in this valley and you need a winter coat like year round. But that really changed my life. At the time that I was at JMU, I was actually in the minority, if you will, because the majority of the campus were first generation college students. And I didn't even have the language to even describe that then, obviously, but everyone was new to this thing and trying to figure it out. So there were no dumb questions. Everyone had these unique experiences and backgrounds and parents that didn't know what to tell us to do or how to do it. So they were footing the bill. But other than that, there really wasn't that much that they could really share with us to help us out with this whole process. It's like, okay, you're smart, figure it out for yourself. And so that was my experience there. And so then after that, I knew I wanted to get a master's degree in something, didn't know quite what. I had an undergrad degree in business, and so it made logical sense to get a master's in business administration. And I took the first semester of an MBA program and I said, this sucks. I don't want to do this. I don't like looking at financial spreadsheets. I don't like doing any of this. This is just, no, thank you. And so I looked right across the street and noticed that across the street on the very same campus, they did have a seminary there. And I was like, that's interesting. I know I don't want to be a pastor, but values and faith are very central to what I do. And I really would love to work with students. So how can I kind of mix this all together and make a career out of this thing? And so I literally got up and walked across the street to the seminary and said, how do I start school here? Like, how do I apply? What do I need to do? Do I need to like transfer from one side of the street to the other side of the street? How does this work? And so I arrived there and they said, oh, fill out this application and give us a little bit of time. Well, I filled out that application in June thinking, there's no way they're going to let me in here. I mean, I had like subpar undergrad grades. I barely got out by the grace of God, literally. I shaped up, it's like most of us, like first year grades suck. And then after that, you kind of shape up a little bit. But by that point, it's like the almost too late moment. Like you did great, but mathematically, we'll see how this goes. And so So fast forward from June to late August, I was sitting in my residence hall because I was actually a hall director at that time, hoping and praying that something would work out with this graduate school thing, but I at least had my housing covered no matter what happened here.
Mm.
So I applied to this program, and on Thursday, prior to the Monday of the first day of classes, I got a phone call that said, "Hey, are you going to register for classes?" And I said, "Hey, what are you talking about?" Right. Like, this is like a true miracle. Like, this is better than like water to wine type stuff, right? And so when they called, I said, "What do you mean register for classes? You didn't receive the acceptance letter that we sent to you back in June?" No, I didn't get the letter back in June. So I had 3 days to get my life together to start this master's program. And so I said, "Okay, Lord, looky here, looky here. I'm going to take this semester by semester and see what happens." If it's not for me the first semester, at least I tried. And I literally took it step by step, semester by semester, and fortunately was very successful. Really had a great time and met plenty of people that were trying to explore. You know, I think a lot of times people go into seminary trying to get more answers to questions, and you actually go and you end up with more questions than answers.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just literally getting comfortable with exploring. And so for me, that was a fantastic experience. I was there in a 5-year program, and I ironically finished up in 3 years because, again, I was a hall director, which meant I would have housing 12 months out of the year. I actually had the only residence hall that housed summer camps and programs. So I always had work, which meant that I could go to school during spring, summer, and fall. So wrap this thing up pretty quickly here. And so at that point I said, okay, enough already. I bow to everyone that's in residence life. Let me just say that first. And I also think if you're in higher ed, you need to have some type of experience like that to really get all the layers to students. And so I wouldn't change that experience for anything, but I wouldn't stay another day either. Let me just put it like that. And so after that, I actually was recruited for a position at a very large public institution to serve as one of 23 campus ministers at the time. And so it was kind of like this backdoor approach of, I want to work with students about spirituality, but I don't want to get a second or third theology degree at all. And so that was really my way of kind of creating a vocation rather than doing a traditional vocation. And so then fast forward, I served there. I was actually serving as a campus minister during the time of the Virginia Tech shootings. And let me just share how interesting that whole process was. So I was one of 23 campus ministers. Each one of us maybe got an opportunity to preach or do the liturgy for the Sunday, maybe once or twice per year. I mean, it's very rare that you get to do it because it's such a rotation. It was so many of us. It happened to be that my one time during that year was the Sunday immediately following the tech shootings. And so I had to get up there and explain to people how God is still divine and God knows what's going on and everything's going to be all right, but we just lost lives on a college campus. Yeah, that was very difficult. On top of that, being the only African-American campus minister on campus at that time. And so all of those extra burdens that I was kind of carrying, trying to figure that out. So that I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything, because it really shows you how to guide people and shepherd people when you really don't have all the answers, but you know that there's something in control much larger than yourself and larger than these campuses. And so I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. And so then after that, after I was a campus minister, when you're on a grant funded position, the money runs out at some point. And you kind of know that. And so I was figuring out, okay, what's the next step for me? And so I just randomly applied to a position that was at a smaller public institution. And I said, okay, let's see what happens. It's for the associate director position in a multicultural center. Let's just see what happens. No, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm a quick learner. It'll be all right. All right. Okay. So I applied for this position, and the dean of students, harasses me. Like, we need you to come on campus for this interview within the next 48 hours. Can you make it here? I'm kind of giving a lot of excuses. I don't know, maybe, what have you. And so finally he calls back the last time and he says, no, I need you here by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Can you get here? Okay, I'll see what happens. And so I drive up to this interview. I'm not even sure I'm answering these questions in remote fashion to what I need to be talking about. Like he's asking about student development theory, all these other things. And I'm like, okay, I just learned that a couple of weeks ago in my doctoral program. So maybe I can look at a few notes really quickly and respond to your question. And so apparently I did fairly decently, because before I could even finish the drive back home the following day, I got a call with the offer for the job. Now, this is where it gets really good. This is where it gets juicy. So I take this position as associate director thinking, oh, I'm so excited. The director will come back from FMLA. She's just had her first son, I believe it was. So I'm so excited to come back and really learn, because that was my goal, was to kind of be mentored by her. And so 3 weeks into my time starting this new position, she lets our dean of students know, hey, I'm enjoying this parent life. I ain't coming back. Have a good time with that. See ya. So she didn't come back. Now, so within 3 weeks, I've now become the director of what was called the James Farmer Multicultural Center. And if anyone knows the Freedom Riders and Dr. King and all of those movements, whenever you look up, even more recently with John Lewis, and you've seen some of this kind of the throwbacks to everything that Mr. Lewis did in his lifetime, you'll see some photos, and those photos include Dr. James Farmer. He was the chief architect of the Freedom Rides. He actually was not at the March on Washington with Dr. King because he was imprisoned at the time. And so the Multicultural Center is named after Dr. Farmer. And so given that, I'm like, I haven't even really processed how significant this is right now. So it's almost like someone saying, congratulations, you're the executive director of the King Center. It's like, wait, what? What just happened here? And so that's kind of how I stumbled and fell into my Multicultural Center role, which actually was my first professional role in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I had to learn things really quickly. We were in a makeshift office at that time because we were building a student center, so forth. So all of that was going on at once while I'm in my doctoral program. Crazy. And so I spent time there for a few years. I learned so much about even creating chief diversity officer positions and all these other things that I learned the back end of because we were trying to figure things out. And so after that, within maybe 2.5, 3 years of my time being there, that's when I got engaged and we moved closer to the Maryland side of things because he was working at the Pentagon at the time. And we know how Northern Virginia traffic is just not to be played with. And so we wanted to get on the other side of the Beltway. And so I, once again, randomly applied for this position as the associate director of another multicultural center. This one was for academic support. And I was thinking to myself, okay, now I know a lot about student diversity. I know a lot about student subcultures, but I don't know a lot about academic support, whether it's running a tutoring center or even academic affairs. I don't know how this works. I'm going to have to figure this thing out. And so once again, I interviewed for the position. The director calls me back before I can finish my drive back home, says, hey, do you want to accept this position? I said, oh my God, what are you talking about? You don't want me. You really don't want me. He's like, no, I really want you. I really want you. And so ended up taking this position at a very large public institution here in Maryland. And just to give you a point of comparison, I was moving from a small public institution that served between 3,000 and 4,000 students total to a larger campus that served about 13,000 students of color out of all of the student population. Wow. So that the measurement is quite different, right? So the volume was ridiculous. Again, I learned a lot about supervision. I learned a lot about really about academic affairs and how the academic area of any university works because I had been in student affairs for so many years. And so that was just an amazing experience I wouldn't trade for the world. And my supervisor still is one of my greatest mentors. He studied under Rita Hardiman and a bunch of wonderful folks, William Cross and so forth, that are some of the people that created the theories that we now study about diversity and inclusion. So I learned so much from working with him, and I could probably call him right now if I needed to, if there were anything that I might need for support. So then after about 10 years of that, I was trying to figure out, okay, so I feel kind of stuck because I'm not quite sure if I want to go over to the faculty side. I've interviewed for a few positions here on campus and it just didn't seem to be the right fit. So what should I do next? Well, my best friend who was then the inaugural vice president of inclusion and equity at another large institution, sent this job posting. She emailed it out to me and a bunch of other people and said, hey, if there's anybody that you think would fit this position, you know, send it out to your folks. We know you have wide networks. I'm looking at this posting like, you are like the worst BFF in history, because why would you not consider me for this role right now? This is like the first time I actually felt confident in saying, oh, that's me. That's it. Like, you know, it's 75% you can do it and 25% stretch. And so you're trying to think about whether you want to apply for it or not. And so I applied for the position. She didn't know I applied for the position because I didn't tell her. I just applied for the position. And so lo and behold, after we got further on in the process, she picks up the phone and she says, Shaunna, why didn't you tell me you were in the top 5 candidates for the position? I said, I might just show up on campus one day. You never know, right? And so lo and behold, I'm coming for this final interview, which was in November or so of 2018, November, and had this fantastic interview, really enjoyed myself. And I said, okay, I'm just leaving it to God now. I did the best I could do. I thought I did a great interview. We'll see how it goes. And so my supervisor, who was a great mentor at the time, he knew all about it, knew that I was looking to go to the next level, was extremely in support of this particular role. And so I'm waiting and waiting for them to get back to me. I'm like, I got to tell them something. We're about to go on winter break. And we know winter break can be like 3 weeks. And my supervisor at this time is about to go on this fantastic cruise. So I need to let him know something before he's out of commission for 3 weeks. And, or else he'd be showing up to no associate director, right? So it's like, oh, what do you do? And so literally I get the phone call at about 9:15 on a Wednesday morning. My supervisor is boarding a ship by 10 o'clock that morning. So I have about 35, 40 minutes of turnaround time to let him know that it's a wrap for Shaunna, and I will be back for maybe, 2 days in January, and then I'm off to my next campus.
And have a great cruise.
Have a great cruise. Have a good time, right? Drink heavily. Thank you very much. And so, yeah, and so that's how I ended up in my current position now. Like I said before, I had lots of support in that role. And, so for me, it's been this path where, again, it was kind of stumbling forward. It definitely was not planned. So anyone that asked me, well, what's your career trajectory? I'm like, trajectory? What are you talking about? And you just fall. You just keep falling. And so that's kind of how I got to where I am now. And I so love the campus that I'm on and the work that I do, because I get to kind of use 23, 24 years of student affairs experience to talk to a bunch of academics who don't know student affairs at all. And so I'm kind of the interpreter between all of these folks, and it just really has been a true blessing. And so that's kind of the long-winded answer to that question, but it's a story that I love to talk about, because every time I think about it, I realize how much I didn't know what I was doing, and yet it still seemed to work out.
I took away so many nuggets.
Oh, what'd you get?
You were telling the story, and I was just like, ooh, a nugget. Mm-hmm. Ooh, a nugget. So I would probably say one of the biggest things, and we talk about it all the time between us, is taking advantage of the opportunities when they present themselves. And one of the things that I really took away from, what you're saying is, like, we talk about it and we dwell on it a lot, and the opportunity is there and it's gone before you can even, make a decision. Mm-hmm. And it could be the perfect opportunity, the right opportunity for you. But I don't know if it's self-doubt or if it's not what you planned. And you kind of talked about that a little bit, like your trajectory. You're just kind of like, oh, like this right here in the moment is right for me. And your faith, I heard that a lot within that. And you kind of went for it. And I was just kind of picking nuggets. I was like, when those opportunities are there, like, trust in yourself, trust in your process, trust in what you know about you and the things that are important to you, and make moves. And that's kind of what I was taking from that. And the listeners, hopefully I picked it out and kind of pinpointed it for you. But, sometimes it's so easy to get caught up in a trajectory or what you sought out or what you've planned for yourself. And you miss opportunities which can help you get to where you're supposed to be. And I think you kind of hit on that. So that's when I was taking away those nugget pieces. I was like, oh my goodness, like, wow. And the story obviously was.
Well, and you brought up a good point too, because that's one of the things I realized that movement kind of started happening as I was prepared. And so, and let me give you that another small nugget with that too, is that there was never a moment where I didn't have, for example, my CV or my resume ready. Like there was never a point in time where it wasn't updated, or I didn't add something. Like I made it my business to always have a ritual of updating it, like if something major happened. So it might be as frequently as the end of every month, for example, where I would update it with things that I was doing. So, you know, given that things like that happening where, you know, a lot of people, they miss out on opportunities because they don't have their CV or they don't have their portfolio available or ready. And so for me, I just tried to always be ready, even with something as simple as your CV or your portfolio.
Oh man.
Yeah.
It's time to update ours.
I know, right? As you were saying that, I was like,
oh, it's time.
I was like, she's speaking to me.
Yeah.
Like I update it when I think I'm going to look. And when that opportunity is presented to you, like you, so, you know, you're being recruited.
And then you're like, oh man, I gotta hurry. And it might not be right. Oh.
Right. And I don't even trust my memory to remember, you know, when you're very busy in your career, it's hard to even remember all the good stuff that you do. And so it's like, let me jot that in real quick, like, you know, almost treating it like a living document that you're updating on a regular basis. And so, you know, that's one of the things I did. And the moment that I did that, that's when all these opportunities started opening up and coming up for me. And you know, folks didn't have to wait a week for me to get myself together because it was already together. So that's one thing that I've really tried to stay faithful to, even if I'm not job searching. Like right now, I'm not looking for anything. I love what I do, but I still keep that because I'm so afraid that I'm going to forget some of the things that I did that are really integral to my career. And so I just use that as a living document.
Awesome.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, we want to ask you, and very specifically in your roles with multicultural centers in institutions of higher ed, we have a lot of people who listen to us who do work in higher ed. We have a lot of people who don't work in higher ed. And I think that this summer has really brought to light a lot of the, I hate to put it this way, but almost like the inequities that we see within like diversity and inclusion initiatives in different organizations. And I think that's just, you know, it really came to light. It really came to the forefront. And so something that we've talked about often in the past 2 or 3 months now on the podcast even is the things institutions or organizations are doing are sometimes seen as more like performative or placating at times when it comes to really exploring diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we really are wondering, like, what are the things that organizations can do to be transformative, to really like take actual action steps in terms of really exploring diversity, really understanding inclusion and inclusive practices for your employees or for your students or your stakeholders who you're serving. How can we be transformative? What are some of the ways that we can put actual action to practice? Because we know that people are listening and probably have a lot of the same questions. And I'll even make a reference to Daryl. Daryl was so frustrated, probably 2 or 3 months ago, that he was like, if I hear one more person say task force, he'd be like, I'm going to call it tax force because they're taxing and they don't do a lot usually. So we're curious from your, you know, professional expertise, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love that tax force. I need to write that down. Tax force. I'm going to start using that. No, but I hear you, because what ends up happening in my experience, and especially when I kind of critique my own institutions where I've worked previously, is that oftentimes we do a lot of work. So the tax force that we're talking about here, they do a lot of research looking at data. They do a lot of looking at best practices. They bring in a lot of voices and have lots of conversations that become very circular conversations. And then we put together a really lovely report that's sent off to someone, and then we don't know what happens to it. Okay. That's what usually happens. I think the steps that need to happen beyond that, I still think that that's valuable, but it still falls flat on its face if you don't have, and I know this sounds so elementary. But if you don't have basic timelines in place for when things should happen, if there's not someone specific that's responsible for making it happen, and if there's no assessment or accountability measures to prove what success really looks like, right? So that's when everything falls flat on its face. And I might even throw a fourth piece in there where there's no communication plan for how we're going to share with people. This is the plan of what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, who's responsible for it, who's behind us on the line if it doesn't happen. That's part of transparency. And so what usually ends up happening is that we've done all of this work, and yes, some people might be executing on some of these plans, but there's no measurement to find out whether is this really working or not, right? So for example, if I put into a DEI plan that, oh, we want to increase diverse faculty hires for our entire institution, well, what does that mean? Does that mean a percentage? Does that mean a particular area? Are we talking about a particular major or a college that sees underrepresented in very different ways? So for example, underrepresented in education means you probably don't have enough men, and you probably don't have enough men of color. However, if I'm looking at the STEM fields, then I'm looking for everyone of color. They're underrepresented. Or let's say I'm looking specifically in, let's say, maybe even, I don't know, the health professions, for example, overwhelmingly female. So underrepresented will be different in different areas and different disciplines. And so I need to know, what are we really talking about when we're talking about underrepresented? What are we really talking about when we're trying to measure success? And if it's not measurable, then it's just flat out not a goal. I mean, I think that's something we all learned in freshman year when we started setting goals for ourselves in college. If it's not measurable, it's not a goal. So for us, I think, we have to get very comfortable with assessment that's formative assessment. It's assessment where we're measuring things and it's telling us what to do next. I don't care for measurement for the sake of measurement, because then somebody throws it in a really pretty report and it never gets used. Mm-hmm. But when we're looking at assessment and really splicing that data to then tell us, okay, what do we do next? That's a different conversation. And so again, going back to that living document concept, every assessment report should be a living document. It should be telling us what to do next semester, next year, next quarter. And if not, then it's just very pretty. And a lot of people really spend a lot of time. And putting my business degree brain back in, I oftentimes think about task forces that have all these people in there. And as I'm sitting around these large committee meetings, I'm looking around thinking to myself, how many hours are we putting into this project? How much is everybody around this table getting paid? How much did we just spend for a report that we're not trying to execute on? I think that's basic math. I mean, my 6-year-old and 9-year-old love math. They could probably calculate that for us right now. So for those of us who are executives, especially those of us in senior admin with terminal degrees, that seems to be a no-brainer to me. I do like, of course, inclusivity when it comes to hearing various voices, but I also think that when you have a 55-person committee, really, is anything going to get done? Not necessarily. And so, therefore we get to a place where we start to stall out a bit. And so then we are actually tax forces, because we're really spending a lot of money and we're not really moving in the direction that we want to move in.
Ooh. I love all that.
That was good.
I know. And I'm just thinking, I mean, you're speaking my language because I'm an analyst, and my job is to take the data and put it into reports for people.
You know better than I do. Exactly.
But now here you go. So what are you going to do with it? I hope you do something, because I spent all this time. So exactly. Really speaking my language there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. My personality and the way that I am result driven. So I like the results. I like the actionable items, and how can we get from point A to point B. And in that episode that April was mentioning, I said, when we get in those, tax forces and we sit in the room and we're around the table with 30 people, to me, it feels like we're just sitting around seeing who can say their idea the loudest and the best.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Yes, absolutely. Well, and when I sit in those rooms, because let me take a step back. Now in my current role, I realize that when I'm sitting in those rooms, especially when I'm sitting in those committee meetings, I have to hold together both my both my privilege and my oppression at the same time in those rooms, right? So I realized that, yes, you know, depending on who's in the room as well, you know, yes, I'm walking in as a Black woman. Yes, I'm walking in as a mother. Yes, you know, all these other things add to this list of things. But then I also realized too, that as much as I'm just, this is my sister girl, Shaunna from around the way type person, that's my own personality. I also realized that people, when they're with me in some of those committee meetings, they see the assistant provost for diversity and inclusion walking in. They don't see just Shaunna, my girl from around the way. They don't see that. And so given that, I'm also very aware of when people might be watering down language that I'm like, no, I really want to know what you think. I wouldn't have asked you to come here if I really didn't want to know what you think. And so given that, helping people to feel comfortable with speaking their mind, speaking their experience, knowing that I'm going to value their experience and we're not just shooting the breeze here because we don't have anything else better to do, that I consider it part of that, that formative data as well that we're pulling together to make the best decisions for students and faculty and staff. And so, you know, given that I have to sometimes break through some of that privilege that I know is there that might kind of damper some of what folks would have to say, and I've never had that experience before until, you know, more recently, where I've been in supervisory roles and now in senior administration, where you have to be very cognizant of what type of energy you bring into that space and what comes along with the org chart that represents you. And so given that, you know, what are you bringing into that room that, you know, you may think, oh, it's, you know, it's just Daryl coming in. No, it's Daryl, the fill in the blank, the long title that, you know, supposedly has a bunch of zeros behind the no. No, that's not what we're after here. We're more so about what's the value that everybody brings into the room. And I think that's most important.
So I'm the wild card. So here's the question. I was listening to what you were saying, and I think that's very important in your role and your position. How do you communicate that to other people that may feel like they are not in a position of power or the confidence to speak openly? How do you make them feel like they're able to do that? What is your approach to that?
Great question. So let me give a little bit of history. Let me be a higher ed nerd for a second, then I'll bring it all up to speed. So higher ed nerd, what I usually do is very similar to what historically Black colleges and universities used to do with students when it comes to advising. Advising at historically Black colleges and universities is very, what I love, by the way, so I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, it's very in your face. It's very aggressive. It's very go after the student. No, I'm not going to wait and assume the student is going to come and find my office if they need help. I'm going to go after them and go get them and see what they need. If they don't need anything, hallelujah. If they do need something, I'm here and I want to make sure they know that I'm here to support them no matter what. That's intrusive advising at a predominantly white institution. That's normal at an HBCU, right? And so with me and my approach, especially as a DEI professional, I'm very aware. So let's say, for example, going back to our tax force. I just love that tax force. Going back to that, you know, if I'm in a committee meeting of 25 people, I'm very aware of who's in the room, who's not in the room, who's speaking up and who's not speaking up. So after that meeting, I've probably written down a few notes here and there. I know that, oh, I need to follow up with April because she didn't mention too much in that meeting. So let me just shoot her a quick email or maybe even pick up the phone and call and say, hey, April, you know, I really appreciate your involvement in the tax force, but I also wanted to get your perspective on some things because I realized that it might not have been enough time for you to share with me your perspective. What do you think about ABC? And that's what I'll do after a meeting. And lots of times the individual, let's say they may not have very much to add, which is completely fine, but I would say the majority of the time they've had things that they wanted to express that they weren't sure whether it was going to be confidential or not. There may have been other people in the room that also had a power play, so it may not have even been about me, assistant provost of anything, but they may not have felt comfortable in that space. And so when I approach them in confidentiality and ask them these questions, then I can take the lesson without taking the person, if you will. So whatever their additional theme is that we maybe didn't touch upon in that task force, I'm able to take that back and fold that back into the information, which then becomes formative data for what I want to do next. And so I have no problem doing that. And I've done that, gosh, countless times when I've noticed that someone may not speak up, but I think they have major contributions. And I wouldn't have asked them to be on the doggone committee if they didn't. And so I might do some intrusive administration, if you will, by reaching back out to them and finding out what their perspectives are.
I love that, because something that we've talked about before on the podcast, and we've even talked about it in like division meetings, like over chat, is something will come up and somebody will say, well, we want this to be a very safe space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his biggest pet peeve, because he's like, safe for who? Like, who do you intend for this space to be safe for? And so I love that you do that, because you're right. It's not every space, just because somebody says it's safe or you should feel comfortable here. Not everybody is going to feel comfortable or safe in that space to say what they feel like they need to say, or to contribute in a positive manner to the conversation. So I love that you do that. That's great leadership.
Well, and both of you are on point with that whole safe space piece, because I was reading something, I wish I could remember. I read so much in a day. But what I do recall about what I read was that it's almost a point of privilege to say, hey, this is a safe space, because it's like, who are you to determine what's safe for me or for someone else? So, that's not your place to say what's safe for me. I will determine whether it's safe or not. And so what a lot of professionals have been doing, especially for those of us that do kind of like difficult dialogues, of course, but just in administration in general, many dialogues are difficult. And so given that, bringing it up to people that it may, God forbid, it may never be a safe space for everyone in this room, but we're asking folks to be brave in this space instead and take a calculated risk even. So we're not saying that you got to jump out a window with, a comment or something that you might not have said anywhere else, but what we call comfort plus one, whatever your comfort level is, take one step out of that level to take a very small risk of sharing information that you might not have shared in the past, and started to flex that muscle and kind of get used to that type of sharing process. And I think that's a great way to kind of coach people into becoming more comfortable. And again, I like to stress very clearly that I want to be aware of the space I take on in the room as an administrator, but I also want to be aware that there might be contextual dynamics in the room that I'm not even aware of, where Daryl may not want to say something because April's in the room. April may not want to say something because whoever's in the room. And that has nothing even to do with me, but I'm honoring history and context at the same time, which necessitates some of that intrusive administration of, we may need to have a side conversation, and that's completely fine too.
Mm.
Oh my gosh. I know. It's so good. I can't wait for people to hear this. I feel like we've talked a lot about some of those. I'm gonna do a wild card.
Oh yeah.
I never do wild cards. I know.
Whoa.
Shock and awe.
I know. Shock and awe. Well, we talked a lot about what are great action steps and what works, and we talked a little bit about barriers. I am curious, well, first, before I throw a wild card, I am curious, are there any barriers that you see that are barriers to really being on the right track with diversity, equity, and inclusion within any organization, but specifically in higher education?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, barriers to being on the right track. Well, I would say a few things that are barriers. I think, let me recall back to a conversation I had last week with a bunch of educators. One of the biggest barriers that they discover, which I think would be the case in higher ed or even K through 23, I would say one of the biggest barriers is that we translate care, compassion, and empathy for everybody, the students, faculty, staff, especially people that are underrepresented. We translate that into the actual work. So I can walk around caring all day that Daryl is a successful Black man in higher education because I know he's, a needle in a haystack when it comes to his field or his area, et cetera. I can care all day. But if I'm not actually doing things around that to support a Daryl on my campus, that's when my care, compassion, my empathy, et cetera, isn't producing any fruit. Let me put it that way. So for example, for me, and maybe it's because I'm the mom of 2 Black boys, they're 9 and 6. And so I always have a bias and a leaning towards men of color, period. But I'm going to be very intrusive when it comes to looking at a department or looking at any institution. I want to know, how many men of color do you have on your campus? I want to know. That's probably like one of the first data points that I even look at for most campuses, because I know how much you care about that demographic or not. I had, when I first arrived at a previous institution, this dean in particular was bragging because they had increased the number of men of color across the entire campus. Well, I realized that the percentage that was given to me, the majority of those men of color were in athletics, which is nothing wrong with that. But we had one professor who was in, and wasn't even a full professor. I think this person was like a lecturer, wasn't even on the tenure track, who identified as a Black male in another department. So they ended up hiring, I think, 20 men of color, but only one of them was an academic. But you're taking the power of that larger number to say, look at what we've done here. I'm like, wait a minute, you haven't done very much if I'm looking at the real data here. I don't see very many men of color who are academics walking into this institution. So I still have a problem with these numbers. So if you're not looking closely enough, that can be a barrier. So I think the care, empathy, compassion around these issues still doesn't translate to action. We still have to kind of make sure the rubber meets the road on some of those things. So I would say that's one barrier. I think the second barrier to things is that when we, how can I say, I always harp on resources, and I think people hear resources as just money, and I don't want it to be just money. Resources meaning, of course, money, time, human beings, all of that necessitates some attention if you're very serious about diversity and inclusion. I had one faculty member who was a tenure track faculty member at a previous institution that said, it really takes too much time to recruit diverse faculty members, so we just post it in the Chronicle and we'll see what happens. Well, when I broke down the data, which I know April will love, when I broke down the data on certain things, that really helped them to understand how we are literally looking for needles in haystacks. So for example, one of my great examples of a hire previously was we were looking for lots of diversity in our STEM fields in particular. And during that previous year, Daryl, you will just love this stat here. This tells you needle in a haystack. There were only 7 Black men in the entire country that graduated with a terminal degree in mathematics. 7 in the country. I didn't even believe it myself. I actually called the owners of the database to make sure that it wasn't a mistake, and it said, no, ma'am, it was not a mistake, right? And so when I found out that there were only 7 Black men in the entire country that graduated with this particular terminal degree, and I found out that one of them lived down the street from my institution, I called my higher ups and said, hey, just wanted to let you know, there's a Black unicorn down the street. What can I do to go get him? I will be like James Brown. I will go beg, please, will you please come and teach on my campus? What do I need to do to get you here? And my higher up said, absolutely, go ask for numbers and find out what we can do to see if we can get this person on the tenure track at our institution. Miracles still happen. We ended up getting this person on the campus, but once again, that's a needle in a haystack. And so when people find out the data that the numbers aren't there, the pipeline is severely flawed and leaking, what can we do to patch up some of those holes? I think that's a big barrier as well, is that we're not looking and we're saying, oh, well, no one's really interested in coming to this area of the country, or, oh, no one's really interested in coming to this institution because of its history, what have you. Not so. And I think that's even more so, especially for institutions that are in very diverse regions of the country and very diverse states in the country. People are there just waiting to be tapped on the shoulder. And so some of the traditional methods of reaching out for the sake of diversity will not happen. Sometimes you have to go out and really, shake the bushes and say, hey, we are very interested in what you have to offer to our institution. Would you please come? And would you please be a champion, hopefully, of diversity, not by having to be a diversity expert, but just simply by coming and being yourself and being a model to our students and other faculty member of what excellence looks like when it comes to inclusivity and your field. And so that's what we ask for. So I think that can be a barrier as well, is the build it and they will come type feeling of resources, because if that were the case, they would have come. They're not coming. We have to go get them. And so what does it mean to have a little bit of a different perspective when it comes to providing resources if we're really serious about structural diversity of numbers, which then starts to lead into some of the atmosphere and climate on our campuses as well.
I think that is amazing. I think that's awesome to have that type of support. As I was listening to you kind of tell that story, to have that type of support where you could go out and do that. And I'll share a story really quick for the sake of time about me serving as someone that was hiring a position. And I was concerned just because I had numerous Black men that applied and that made it to campus as finalists. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, I feel like they're going to say something because I'm bringing all these Black men to campus and interview for this position. Like, I was nervous. And I actually sat down with my supervisor and said, hey, like, I'm feeling nervous about this because I know we can only bring so many to campus. And out of that number, 80% of them are Black men. Like, am I good? Am I okay to do this? And the fact that you had that support to go out and solicit, I think is very important. And that's what I took away from that. And I think that's awesome.
And you already know I love the data piece, but there is, we've talked often in the past couple of months about implicit bias as well. And so there's a really great article, I think it was either New York Times or Washington Post, I think, where they talked about you can show somebody their implicit bias, and it really doesn't matter. It doesn't actually change behavior over time. But if you show them the data, especially in large organizations, especially at like the C-suite or executive level, data is what will actually, it may not change thinking or attitudes, but it typically will work to change the behavior or the outcome or the decisions being made. So I'm like, well, yes. But that was a perfect, I mean, your barriers really wrap that up into a nice little bow there.
Well, here's can I get on a soapbox for like 2 seconds, and then
I
promise, right? And I think it fits together what you're both talking about, is that I think the reason why I was relatively successful in my previous institution before I came to my current institution was that it was a combination that was a weird one, a combination of the diversity, equity, and inclusion background and experience. And then I got very fortunate. While I was in my doc program, I had a fantastic friend who was writing his entire dissertation on CAS standards and assessment. And so I learned everything I could from Jesse. Well, I don't find too many people that put together the DEI experience and the assessment experience. And that ends up being the problem. So you end up having assessment folks that don't know diversity folks that don't know assessment, and then they don't communicate with one another. And then I'll take it to a whole separate level. Then you have people who may not identify with diversity, equity, and inclusion concerns, and they might be privileged themselves, and they may feel very, they may feel some kind of way about requiring measurement and assessment of diversity work. Because it's on this particular level, it is let's be grateful that someone is doing the work at all. And so this feeling of assessment being punitive. And we don't want that feeling at all of people. And so I think that's part of the bigger challenge, is that we don't have that good combination of both diversity and assessment at the same time working together. I think that's a major problem.
Yeah. And to get up with you on the soapbox, it's really just been very recently that even I've learned, like, critical race theory has a huge part when you look at analysis of data, because if you are an analyst and you're not taking the time to break down dig into demographics, because you just want to keep everything aggregated and you want to report on a bell curve, that's a big issue, because then you're not finding out what's happening to students or stakeholders or whoever within the margins, and you're completely doing a disservice. And so even I've been discovering this over the past like 4 or 5 months, but that's so important. And it really does, it contributes to the data set that you can actually give to decision makers and say, I know we typically report this in aggregate, but we really need to explore the margins here. So
oh yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and my master's and doctoral level students know that I am really adamant about asking about the asterisk. Anytime there's an asterisk on a report, I want to know what's up with that asterisk. So if you're saying, oh, we have an asterisk beside Native Americans because they're less than 1%, well, I still want to know who's on the doggone campus, period. And I want it broken down by tribe if you have it. I want everything. I want everything. I want it all, because there's a story to be told behind the asterisk. I think that's so important. And yeah, April and I, we're right here.
This is why I love you so much.
We're doing the I thing for sure. Absolutely. I want to know about the asterisk.
Yep. We've actually had
those
conversations
marginalized groups.
about asterisk.
That she skips everything else and goes right to that.
There you go. Exactly. Well, and I noticed it when I was looking at reports at my previous institution of both students and faculty. And this was longitudinal data that was looking at the last decade, right? And so we had these departments that were bragging about, oh, we had this increase in students, or we had this increase in faculty, et cetera. And so I was looking at one data set that said, oh, well, we had a gain of 5 faculty of color. And I'm like, I'm calling BS on that, because you lost 7 in the same time period. So what are you talking about here? Nobody wants to have that conversation. And I am truly not a guru. Like April, you're probably much more well-versed than I am when I'm asking about data sets. But common sense is telling me that, yeah, you feel proud that you gained 5, but you lost 7. So that's a net of -2. So what are we really talking about here? What are we talking about here?
I love that.
That's not okay. It's not okay. And to me, it feels as if it's padding the numbers in a way that's, as we always say, the hero always tells the story, right? Well, I don't want to be a hero of that particular story, because that's leading an entire campus astray. So I want to look at the breakdown. So prior to my arrival at my previous institution, folks looked at, again, in aggregate, they were looking at aggregate change over time, and they weren't looking at drill downs to specific departments or specific majors and so forth. And so when I'm looking at certain departments and majors, well, an entire department may have had, or let's say an entire college may have had an incremental increase in this number of underrepresented folks. But then I'm also looking at departments that have literally never had a person of color as a faculty member in the entire history of the university. So who's really looking at data? And I don't work in institutional research. I just ask a whole bunch of questions that make people feel uncomfortable. I don't work there. I'm just asking. And so when I start to ask these questions, I find things out. So, one of the things that I did when I first arrived at my current institution is I started prioritizing some of that. I started drilling down into, let me see the college, let me see the department, and who are the people that aren't there, because that's where we need to start. These are the holes where we need to start. No, I really don't care that you had a net increase of 10% in your department, because you actually lost 25 in the last 10 years. So what are we going to do here? I ask the questions that people don't want answered. And I think what's pretty cool too is that most of the time when I call institutional research, I know my question is going to take a minute, because they don't even have like a spreadsheet model of what I'm about to ask. I know when I'm doing great. Look, I made all my money on that day, because they can't give me a quick answer because they've never thought about the question. That's the issue. And so I have no problem waiting for my data. And when I get it, I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. They probably hate to see my extension when it rings. They probably hate to see my emails, but that's how we have this formative data that tells us, it's a roadmap of what we do next. Yeah. It's a roadmap. And what really gets me is when we don't ask the questions. And if I call, this happened at my previous institution, not my current one. My previous institution, I would ask questions, and when the answer comes back that they never collected that data set, yeah, I'm with you, Daryl. it's like the cartoon of Tom and Jerry where the steam comes out of the ears. Like, what do you mean you never asked about Native American? What do you mean you never asked about first gen? What do you mean you never asked about military? What do you mean that you didn't? What? No, it's beyond comprehension that the question wasn't even asked. And so, given that tells me what a campus really cares about. Did you ask about them? If you were to come home, April, and the house was quiet and you were expecting Daryl there, you would walk in the door and say, where is it? Let me pick up the phone and call and see where he is. Let me see what's going on. I need to ask and find out where he is. And we do the same doggone thing with data, where if we care about somebody, we ask where they are in the data. If we don't care about them, we don't ask about them in the data.
Man, that's powerful.
Don't. We just don't. We coming to find Daryl. Where is Daryl? We need to find Daryl. All right. That's what we're trying to do. But when it comes to our students or our faculty, if it's a particular demographic that we don't care about or haven't thought about, we're just simply not asking the question. And so I love it when I start asking about data sets and I find out what they've actually been collecting, what they haven't been collecting. You've been collecting information about sophomores and sophomore slump, but you haven't been asking questions about first generation college students. Why is that? I'm the one that they hate to see come in at institutional research, I'm sure.
I love it. So listen, I want to do this, and all of this is so good. We've been giving them so much, like, for our listeners, y'all are getting this free, like,
I know.
this knowledge, this information. She's just dropping nuggets everywhere. So I don't want to discredit you, and I definitely want to do this since we've given them so much free information. Tell them about Gold Enterprises and about this podcast, because I'm sure between those two, there is so much more of what you just got in this short period of time. Tell us about it, please.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. So let me just say, when I was at my previous institution, I would have a lot of folks outside of higher ed that would ask me some of the similar questions. What do we do? What skill sets or information is transferable to whatever area? I've worked with healthcare organizations, whether they're hospitals or whether they're associations. I've worked with nonprofits. I've worked with police departments. You name it, I've probably worked in some similar industry. And what I so appreciated about them was that they were saying, we need the help of a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional that studied it, that knows what they're doing. They've seen proven results. We realize that higher ed, even as much as we criticize ourselves in higher ed about how far we need to be along, I think oftentimes higher ed is still at least 5 steps ahead of many other institutions because we have the research tangible. Like, even for us in higher ed, we at least know what we need to be doing. Even if we're not doing, we know what we need to be doing. There are some industries that don't even know what they need to be doing yet, or they don't have baseline language around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I found that a lot of folks would call me in and say, hey, can you please just, get us the right language? We don't even know if we're using the right language. What are the cutting edge concepts? What's working in hiring practice and so forth? And so from there, I just got a really high demand for people asking about this work and could you come in and do X, Y, and Z? And so, at that time my sons were much smaller. And so I'm like, I can't justify being away from my boys without actually bringing home something in result of that. So given that, it's like, okay, well, maybe I need to make something more formal. And of course, I didn't want a conflict of interest with my day job, of course. And so I created something completely separate. And so Gold Enterprises, LLC, I've had my license since 2016, and I've continued to work with organizations on 3 different levels. I do the executive coaching piece because there are some folks, which I love, when folks come to me and they say, hey, I'm in a supervisory position or mid-level, even C-suite, senior administration role. It's not the responsibility of the people that I supervise to educate me on these topics. You to help to educate me on some of these topics and kind of give me a roadmap of professional development for my work. So I do that with the executive coaching piece. Then the other thing that I do quite a bit, I work quite a bit with organizations that want full training, whether it's for their full staff or senior administration. And so I think that's extremely important for them because they want a baseline for everyone in their organization to be speaking the same language and have the same concepts. And then there's quite a bit of executive work that I do specifically around diversity strategic planning. So what does it mean to have an entire strategic plan? We're not doing this willy-nilly where we're doing one program here and one workshop there, but we're actually unfolding an entire plan for the entire organization. And what does it look like to both develop that plan and also implement that plan at the same time? And so those plans have lots to do with both the historical information, the data, also some aspirational action planning. Then you definitely have to have who's accountable, what's your assessment measures, what's the timeline. So everything that I mentioned before. So that's what I've been doing with the consulting work on the side. But then when it gets to the podcast, this is fun stuff with the podcast, because as y'all probably know, especially on my social media and everything, I've been a runner now for 9 years, and I've been a triathlete for 6 years. And so 2 years ago, I met my great friend, Lisa Ingerfeld, as well as my other friend, Sarah Gross, who are both the co-founders of this fantastic annual, I guess, conference called Outspoken. And Outspoken, it's kind of a play on words for the spokes on a bike wheel, but Outspoken speaks to diversity in triathlon. And I love it because it had an emphasis on women originally, but now it's really unfolding to have multiple identities in the mix. And so they reached out to me. I came and did a couple of workshops with them the first year that they had Outspoken. Last year, I wasn't able to attend because I had a death in the family. But this year in particular, what's been fun is that we tried to figure out a way to invite more people to have conversation about endurance sports and diversity. And probably it's going to be heavily on diversity and lighter on endurance sports. But Lisa Ingerfeld and I, who's also an academic, we both have backgrounds in intercultural communication, DEI work. She comes in as a naturalized citizen from the UK. I come in as native to the US from Southern Virginia. And we come together and have these fantastic conversations. And for me, it feels like, and this is said with the most sugar I can put on it, this feels like your white girlfriend who gets it for a woman of color. Like, you don't have to explain A through Z, double A through double Z. It's like, oh, I get it. I understand. I'm not going to overstep my boundaries. I can ask a question without feeling a fool. I can explain it without fully explaining it. We can speak in code, all of that. And so I'm so excited about it. And so our first podcast will be on September 1st. Yay. And we chose to call the podcast after lots of research and thinking and overthinking it, because you can imagine what happens with 2 PhDs. We overthink everything. I know we overthink everything. The name is Unfazed. And I love the name Unfazed for the podcast because, you know, we thought about the name and the language for it. We wanted to be unfazed in our approach, meaning that we don't care if we make people uncomfortable with the conversations and the topics that we're talking about. We hope that we make folks kind of take a step out of their comfort zone. So we're unfazed by if people feel uncomfortable because they're actually listening to us talk out loud anyway. So we're unfazed if people feel uncomfortable with the topics. But we also wanted to emphasize the unfazed piece that, you know, this is not an overnight process of becoming allies to underrepresented populations. It's going to be a phased process. It's going to be stair steps. I jokingly said to Lisa the other day, look, I've been Black for 42 years. Okay, so I do not expect anybody to understand Blackness after reading White Fragility one time and then they got it. Of course not. That's ridiculous. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And so the podcast is situated in a way that we get to talk about these fantastic topics that may or may not overlap with endurance sports, but it gives folks an opportunity to think in ways that they probably haven't thought before. And so part of our tagline is to help people think a little bit further than they've ever thought before. Same thing with running, same thing with cycling, same thing with swimming. And so it's our hope to get people really excited about Unfazed. I'm super excited about it because I really prayed hard. I really wanted to do a podcast, but I just didn't have the time or the bandwidth to do all the back end fun production stuff. And lo and behold, this became an opportunity. So I'm really excited to work with Dr. Lisa and we get to talk about all the juicy stuff and it's going to be really exciting.
I cannot wait.
I'm excited about this.
I'm so excited for your
this.
podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited about this.
So I expect both of you to be like our first reviews. Like just before we even drop it, just be like, we know it's going to be great. We don't even have to listen because we know it's going to be great. That's what I need y'all to do. They're
hearing you right now. I mean, already gold. Like, this is definitely one of the best interviews
No
that we've
pun
done.
intended.
No pun intended. Right, exactly.
But I do want to double back because you didn't give yourself enough credit, and you are not just a triathlete. You are a 70.3 Ironman triathlete, and that is huge. That's huge.
Well,
I don't think I could run 3 miles right now if I tried to.
let me just say, for someone who's never been athletic in their entire lives, 1 mile would be a big deal, April. So please do not diminish that 1 mile. Okay, that would be a fantastic thing. But yeah, so after I had my oldest son, well, let me take it a step back. I was very overweight before I was pregnant with my first son, and then it just got out of hand from there. So I just stopped looking at the scale once I got to about 230 or so, and I'm only 5'5". And so I just stopped looking at the scale and said, okay, I got to do something about this after he's born. And so I had my oldest son, Trey, Charles Adam Gold III. And so I had Trey. And after that, I said, let me get my whole life together. Okay, I got to get this thing together because this is not good. And so I trained for probably about 4 months for my first 5K. And I said, all I want to do is a 5K. I want to do 3.1. I'm going to run around the National Harbor at night during this glow run, which was meant to be a really fun run. And so I trained for this, did it in October. And I said, oh, this was pretty, well, first of all, I didn't die. Hallelujah. After not dying, I'm like, okay, I might want to do this again. And so I did another, and I did a few more, and then kind of started building up. Well, the funny in all of this was that this is the irony of gaining and losing weight. So 3 weeks after I met my goal weight, and I had lost 80 pounds, right? I lost 80 pounds. 3 weeks after I hit that 80-pound mark, I found out I was pregnant with my second son. Now, I was thrilled because we wanted 2 sons, right? But that 80 pounds, I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be interesting. And so I stuck to my plan. I still ran for as long as I could while I was pregnant with my youngest son, Kendrick. I only gained about 25 of that back, which was really great because I just, followed doctor's orders. By the way, my doctor was also an Ironman. And so my doctor was like, let me give you exactly what it's safe to do and not do, which I thought was pretty cool. And so anyhow, and I didn't know that either until after the fact. And so as I was getting up there, I was about 6 months pregnant or so with my youngest son. My doctor says, Shaunna, you realize you probably need to cut back on the running because that's going to be really hard on your organs. And, let's think about doing something different. So why don't you think about swimming? I'm like, swim where? Who? Me? I don't swim. What are you talking about? I don't even want to put my face in the water. What are you talking about swimming? Well, I ended up running much less. So my short runs were like 2 or 3 miles, walking, running, kind of alternating. But I spent most of my time in the pool. In fact, the day that Kendrick was born, I usually get up for these insanely early workouts. The day that Kendrick was born, I went to the pool with my training partner, my girlfriend, who's actually his godmother. I went to the pool at 5 a.m. that morning and swam. Swam, I forget how many laps. I still had my bracelet on, my workout bracelet and my watch on with my time on it. And as I'm leaving, I go right across the parking lot to a Panera to get some breakfast on my way to work. Now, this is 6 weeks ahead of time, 6 weeks ahead of any due date here. So I'm not even thinking that anybody might be coming today, right? And so I'm standing in Panera, and this probably is too much information, but I felt a little trickle of something. And then it got worse and worse. And I didn't even recognize what was going on because my oldest son was by a C-section. So I had no clue what it meant to actually give birth to a child, right? By any other means. And so we call my doctor. We rush to the hospital just to make sure everything's okay. We're thinking, oh, it's just going to be a checkup. They're going to send me home to let me sleep and it's going to be all right. The nurse comes in nice and calm. Oh, well, Mrs. Gold, it looks like we're having a baby today. I'm like, what? No, we're not. I'm going to work. I don't know what you're doing. I'm going to work. And so between that 5 a.m. swim and that 11 a.m. second C-section, Kendrick arrived. And so that's what happened. 3 months later, I did my very first triathlon because, again, I was trying to work all the baby weight off and was addicted from there and just kept building on to longer and longer distances. And I will say that when people say that they're an Ironman 70.3 athlete or a full Ironman athlete, it's usually not a brag. It's just more the character of doing it. I mean, no one knows really what it feels like to get up at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning to do a workout by yourself just to see one day possibly happen. And so it's just a point of pride and character that you have the diligence and the willpower and just the focus to do one thing. Even if you never do it again, even if you only do it one time ever in life, you can look back and say that you gave 200% to this one particular thing in life. So that's why I always put it in a bio, and I'm never ashamed of it.
I wouldn't be either.
I would never be ashamed of that. That's amazing. I'd probably lead. I'd lead like my interview with that. Like, by the way, I'm an Ironman. What else do you need to know?
Tell her what I did when I ran my half marathon. My medal.
Ooh, tell me.
To work.
I know that's right. Exactly.
I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I ran a marathon." I'm like, "Okay."
Oh, look, I've got here. Wait a minute. Here you go. I've got my mug.
Yes.
70.3 mug, right? It's like
we have a hard time finding a race because he's like, "I'm not going to race unless there's a great medal." I'm like, "Just race."
I'm with you. I'm with you completely on that. My first 70.3 medal literally is, I wish you had told me beforehand, I would have shown it. It's like literally this big. I mean, it's almost as big as my head, right? It should be. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Oh, you got to have big bling. Big bling. Absolutely. I'm with you 100%, Daryl. I'm with you. You let me know where you racing, okay? I need to know your race schedule so I can just show up wherever you are.
Oh, man.
Well, where can they find you?
Where can they find you?
Where can they find you?
And we know, listen, Dr. Gold speaks, okay, on Twitter.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tell them where else.
Absolutely. Dr. Gold speaks on Twitter. Dr. Gold speaks also on Instagram. You can find me on Gold Enterprises LLC on Facebook. And of course, Shaunna Payne Gold on Facebook as well. I'm in LinkedIn, which surprisingly, people have been like discovering me quite a bit on LinkedIn, which I think is pretty fascinating because I wasn't even active there until this whole pandemic happened. So yes, you can find me in all those different places. And, you know, now that April and Daryl and I are all friends, you can always find me through them. So, you know, you got options.
Right. Okay, on Facebook, you have the best end of the day memes ever.
You know what? Let me tell you, they are like my humor therapy at the end of the day. Like, I don't see how anyone gets through a pandemic without humor. Like, I wish somebody would go back to like the last pandemic and see how they handled it with humor. Like, that would be a whole research project for some kid. But I think it's so crucial to laugh because some of this you almost don't want to believe it's real. You really don't. And so sometimes you got to laugh to keep from crying, which is a good thing. So I post those every day.
Oh man, I love it. Well, we have gotten so much from you.
Yes, we have to do this again.
I think so. And I think we bring Lisa on and we talk to you both about how the podcast is going. And I am so excited to listen. So we will, I'll tell you what, when it drops on September 1st and y'all have a first episode, we will help promote that so that our listeners now look for it from us on September 1st, but also go follow Shaunna, like tonight, go follow her.
Please do.
But yeah, awesome. I think
this was great.
This is amazing.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to do the next episode and we'll come up with some other topics. You know, Daryl and I will be over here talking about our bling from our
bling. I know.
April and I will be talking about our last data report. So it's all good. You know, we got lots to talk about.
Oh yeah, we're super excited. Well, great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Great. Absolutely. You're welcome. Have anything else?
I have like 5 million other things, but we'll save them.
We'll save that for later. For right now.
Right now, until the next time.
That's it.
Bye.
Peace.
Bye.